Lee Haney versus Keone Pearson. At least 206 of you fine folks wanted to see this one, so it is a fan request. Wow, what a difference, but what similarities. Of course, 2024 for Keone Pearson and a 1980s athlete for Lee Haney. Of course, there's going to be huge differences. But Keone Pearson, he has one of those old world physiques. Old school, if you will. And you know what? I'm looking at these two physiques and I'm thinking this is actually going to be a fair comparison. Could be a little bit different in terms of back condition, of course, but you know me, I tend to excuse that type of behavior. Obviously, if Keone Pearson existed in that timeline of Lee Haney, I mean, he would be no more conditioned than the most conditioned guys back then. But he does have that old school physique. He does resemble a 1980s athlete or a 90s athlete. That's my point. Now, sizing, Lee is a giant. Had to use the old fiddly sticks here. You just measure them up. And you can do that, yes, if they're both holding their legs somewhat similar. But having said that, Keone Pearson, he has an edge in the lats, in the midsection as well. Also known as the V-taper. I'd give him an edge in the arms also. Lee, he's so tall. He's big. That could be an advantage to him. Big forearms. Massive big forearms. They all worked with their hands back then. And they built their physiques less on gear when they were very first building their physiques. A lot of guys were serious about bodybuilding back then, and they didn't take any gear to build their primary structure. And I think that's where you get the aesthetic physiques. You see guys now, you could just imagine them. I think I'm going to be a bodybuilder, they say to themselves. And the first day they work out, they're on the gear right away. And I think that builds a blockier, yes, bigger, but a blockier, less aesthetic type physique. So what is that saying? Or what am I saying? I'm saying I think Keone Pearson built a lot of his original muscle mass without gear. Here's the front lat spread, and didn't really give you my ultimate response on the front double, but probably Keone, even though Lee has some massive wheels, and you can see that here. And against an aesthetic guy like Keone Pearson, it's a pretty good match, I have to say. Bigger in the calves also, and it's not just because he's a bigger guy. Lee Haney had some decent calves. No Dorian Yates, but not bad nonetheless. Upper body versus upper body. If not for the overwhelming size of Lee Haney, I mean, this would be a fair comparison, I think. Keone Pearson, at least in this shot. Like I said, the front double I'd probably give to Keone, but front lat spread, I'd go with Lee Haney. And you can tell I'm a little bit hesitant to say I'm going to go for or I'm going to vote for this guy. It's because I don't really do that when it comes to a guy from the 80s versus a guy nowadays. It's just not fair. And also, Lee Haney was the greatest of all time. For his time, I guess, if you look at the grand scheme of things, the most dominant bodybuilder of all time. Keone's not done his career yet, I can tell you that. Go to the side, turn to the side, and you know, it's funny. To me it's funny. The big O in the Olympia symbol behind Keone looks like a big tail. Now, Lee, he's not opened up as much as Keone, but look at the ripped, striated muscle in his big man's chest. He had a big man's chest. A lot of the bodybuilders don't really resemble that remark. Like your Lou Ferrigno's, Lee Haney's, obviously. Arnold. I mean, they all had a big man's chest when you think about it. Serge Nubret also. I guess Frank Zane didn't really have a big man's chest. But either way, let's not pick apart Frank Zane. Let us look at this comparison and take it seriously, I should suggest. Keone winning in the lower half. Winning on the display as well. Keep in mind, he's a lot shorter. Should he not be a lot smaller? Doesn't seem to be. Ultimately, Lee Haney has a big man's chest, like I said. Now turn to the side tricep. And I says to myself, do not say big man's chest again, because you people probably get sick of hearing the same thing over and over again. But look at the size of his pectoral region here, in the side tricep. Lee Haney, no doubt in my opinion, in my mind anyway. Lee Haney winning the side tricep. You could argue Keone winning. One from the front, one from the side. So it is a tie game. If you want to make it a little interesting, go to the back. This could be a make or break situation for one of these guys. You see, this is also practice for me if I ever become an announcer. Calling the action at the Olympia 2030. 2030, Keone Pearson goes for the open class Olympia. And with the lower half that he has here, he is absolutely dominating over Lee Haney. Now, the back development itself, the lats, massive traps on Lee also, that could get him an edge. But it is not like Keone Pearson is Tinkerbell. He has some pretty good lats on his own right, and the traps maybe even bigger. Depends on how you look at it. Lee Haney flexing his lat spread a little bit different in order to make those traps look mountainous on the top. But Keone Pearson, he's maximizing his width, and the traps tend to go down into the center of the back. But either way, if you are a judge, you have to be looking at this thinking Keone Pearson will dominate due to the lower half condition. Now here's the back double. This is also a good pose for Lee Haney, world class, but in my maybe wrong opinion, I believe that his rear lat spread was a little bit better. I'm not so sure he's opening up, maximizing his width of the lats. Of course, for 1987, which when this picture was taken, I don't think that he had anything to worry about from any of his competition. In terms of back width, I mean, this guy was the greatest of his time. Very interesting trap design there as well, if you've ever noticed, on Lee Haney. Good arms. Keone Pearson, again, gonna sound like a broken record, but his lower half is so dominant. Not only the size of the legs, the hamstrings themselves, separation, but the condition. Glutes. I detect a small amount of glutes poking out there for Lee Haney, but nothing that would compete against the condition of Keone Pearson. But back in the real world, of course, the criteria alone forces these guys to get into a condition that would just blow any of these bodybuilders from the 80s out of the whatever, aside from maybe Rich Gaspari, but you gotta look at it a different way. Rich Gaspari was standing next to guys from the 80s. You pluck anybody off today's stage and put them in the 1980 lineup, and they would look even more shredded. I believe, anyway. Now here's the abs and thigh, a pose that was never really the best one for Lee Haney. And some of the bodybuilders that he was competing against had a world-class shot, Rich Gaspari included. But having said that, is Keone Pearson's abs and thigh a strong pose? I like when he does the vacuum. I kind of prefer that. And I know I'm outnumbered in that whole situation. I kind of liked when Derek did it too. But I would like to see an abs and thigh, and Keone goes to the side. Very ripped and striated in the midsection itself. Maybe not as fit and trim as Lee Haney's, and that's as kind as I can be, folks. In both cases, Lee Haney and Keone Pearson, very respectful towards their opponents, and they don't take any cheap shots. And for those type of characters, I like to try to be a little bit more respectful towards them. Now, a guy like Nick Walker, for instance, I'm a huge fan, but if his midsection is hanging out a little bit, I will call it a Holden tank, or something of that nature. Because he likes to play the game. He said Tony O'Burton was the size of his leg. So, if he can dish it out, he can take it. But, like I said, here's the most muscular. Here's the most muscular. We kind of skipped right through that abs and thigh. But yes, these guys are not dishing out any insults towards anyone. And it's not that I'm saying Nick Walker's mean, saying Tony O'Burton, size of his leg. I'm sure Tony O didn't mind. He probably thought it was funny. But my point is, well, actually, we'll forget about that for now. My ultimate response to this is, you can't compare a guy from the 80s and nowadays and expect it to be fair any way, shape, or form. But I was quite surprised how fair this actually was. Size of the muscle. Keone keeping her lean. He's not a big giant block of muscle. He's no Marcus Rule, and I say that as a compliment. One of the more aesthetically pleasing bodybuilders of today. And when it comes to Lee Haney, he is the 8-time. That's like winning 4 Olympia titles and then doing it again. Or winning 2 and never mind. Yeah, pretty close matchup, to be honest. If you're taking it serious, Keone, he'd probably win because of back condition, lower back condition. So you can only compare legacies alone. You can only compare dominance, how dominant they were over their opponents. When it comes to the 80s, huge advancements in the 90s, but they were even bigger. They're bigger. Years later, they're bigger and more refined now, I would suggest. Hit thumbs up, guys. Have a nice one.